All right. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. 20 years ago, my dad gave me a book by Irving Stone entitled, "They Also Ran: The Story of the Men Who Were Defeated for the Presidency." Written in 1943, it was a series of short biographies of the men who'd come in second in every presidential election from 1800 until its publication. Its prologue begins, "The truth can sometimes be seen more accurately at an oblique angle than head-on. The lives of the presidents too often have been sweetened to salve nationalistic pride. No one has thought it necessary to whitewash the defeated candidates. Their lives provide a high-powered and amusing lens with which to judge the standards of their times, the qualities of their victorious opponents, and the political wisdom of the electorate." How often were the voters discerning? How often dumb? How frequently were they fooled, and how frequently did they go unerringly to the better man? How often did they elect the apparently superior candidate, only to find that the presidency was the one job in the nation that he could not handle? How often did they choose the man who was more capable of solving the existing problems, only to have a radical change in the course of history render his particular qualities useless and make the defeated one the ideal executive to handle the new situations? What is the box score on democratic elections since 1800? Are the voters getting smarter all the time, making fewer and fewer mistakes? Or are they repeating the identical errors they made 100 years ago? What is our percentage of wins, losses, and draws? In the next 300 pages, Stone delved into every loser and gave his opinion as to whether they deserved their loss. My personal favorite was his mini biography of Alton Parker, the man who, upon the possibility you don't know, lost to Teddy Roosevelt in 1904, and who Stone described as the least remembered individual within this field of forgotten men. The forgotten man among forgotten men. What I loved about Parker, and remember to this day, is that he was a boring, conservative, and unoriginal, downright forgettable man in all respects of his life but one. Parker was a radical in his staunch advocacy for the humane appreciation and treatment of pigs, whom he delighted in caring for and training. In the book's epilogue, Stone gives his box score for American democracy in 1943. And I know that the language here is highly gendered and chauvinistic, but he was writing in 1943. In the first half of this book, the electorate appears to have been either stupid or deceived in 5 elections and sagacious in 3. In the latter half, their ability to pick the superior man has risen to 5-3, a reversal of the odds. The score is tied. Not even by the meagerest margin has democracy been able to prove that it has the discernment to choose the best man available for the most important office in the land. To this uninspiring record, Stone adds an important caveat: that it should be remembered that election results have to be measured qualitatively as well as quantitatively. A single victory of good judgment in a time of crisis can atone for several election mistakes. Conversely, one election error committed in a crucial hour can offset several wise victories in quieter years. He also astutely observed that throughout this story, it has been evident that party lines have proven stronger than independent judgment. Countless crimes against the welfare of the country and the best interests of the people have been committed in the name of partisanship. Popular government is thus faced with a dilemma. A two-party system is necessary to the functioning of a democracy. Yet out of the two-party system has arisen a majority of the political ills of the nation. No political sulfa drugs have been evolved which could eradicate these election diseases. I think it's fair to say that 80 years later, that remains the case. Stone ends with a moderately optimistic summary that this story of presidential elections has not always been a pretty one. Grievous wounds have been inflicted. Dread diseases have been endemic. Yet, for a century and a half, the wounds have healed and the diseases have abated without killing the patient. That the American government has been able to sustain itself through 39 elections is one of the most promising performances in political history. Perhaps it is salutary that the body politic be ravaged at periodic intervals. It toughens, develops antibodies for the bloodstream so that it cannot be killed off by the first adverse winds. Although grown scarred and gnarled, democracy has developed the ability to withstand attack. Our conception of the democratic process as a form of government is derived from, among other sources, the traditions and experiences of ancient Athens. But that system did not want for critics. Thucydides, the general and historian, Aristophanes, the playwright, Plato, the pupil of Socrates, and Aristotle, the pupil of Plato, all viewed democracy as both practically a failure and in principle unjust. In his 2007 book, What's Wrong with Democracy? From Athenian Practice to American Worship, Lawrence Sammons writes, "The modern desire to look to Athens for lessons or encouragement for modern thought, government, or society must confront this strange paradox. The people that gave rise to and practiced ancient democracy left us almost nothing but criticism of this form of regime on a philosophical or theoretical level. And what is more, the actual history of Athens in this period of its democratic government is marked by numerous failures, mistakes, and misdeeds. Most infamously, the execution of Socrates, that would seem to discredit the ubiquitous modern idea that democracy leads to good government." In our water communion service here about a month ago, I discussed how we Unitarians don't have a lot of martyrs. Well, we don't have a lot of saints either. But if we did, I'd posit that Emerson, Thoreau, and the New England transcendentalists from the first half of the 19th century would warrant placement within the pantheon. Well, in 1849, Henry David Thoreau published an essay that is now titled Civil Disobedience, in which he argued that governments are typically more harmful than helpful, and that indeed the government is best which governs least. a sentiment that might warrant enthusiastic, if hypocritical, support among Republicans today. Thoreau contends that democracy is no cure at all for the inherent ills of government, as majorities, simply by virtue of being majorities, do not also gain the virtues of wisdom and justice. Thoreau saw no need to subjugate his own conscience to the will of the majority, and asserted that the only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. Law never made men a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. In particular, Thoreau refused to recognize, even for an instant, as his government that which was the slavers' government as well, regardless of any majority Democratic opinion. There are even mathematical problems with democracy, or at least with this notion of group choice. The 20th century, the mathematician and political philosopher Kenneth Arrow looked at different possible methods for determining the choice of a group among a number of possible scenarios. The idea being that everybody submits a list of their preferences, A, B, C, D, etc. And the goal is to then create a list of the preferences of the group. That is essentially the goal of an election. To this process, Arrow assigned two important criteria. The first, an incredibly commonsensical one, that if literally every single person in the group, every single voter preferred candidate A to candidate B, that the group should also prefer A to B. Literally, if everyone here said that they'd prefer option A to option B, then our group choice should do the same. Uncontroversial. The second requirement was called independence of irrelevant alternatives, and essentially meant no spoilers. In other words, whether the group preferred A to B should not depend upon the presence of an option C. If you have a group of people that's determining where they should eat dinner tonight, and you've got Italian, French, or Chinese food, the group says we'd prefer Italian. You say, okay, well, that's good because the French restaurant is closed. They shouldn't then say, oh, in that case, we'd want Chinese. Well, it turns out that with only these two criteria, there exists a single unique solution that satisfies these requirements. And it's one that I think we should consider for our upcoming congregational elections. I'll tell you how it works. Everybody here gets their ballot and provides a ranked choice of all of their options. I, as the president, gather up these ballots, search through them, pick out my own, throw the rest in the trash. And we do as I say. It turns out the only option that satisfies these two requirements is a dictatorship. The necessity of a spoiler potentially ruining the process is so pernicious and endemic that you essentially cannot eliminate it entirely. These observations all speak to one self-evident truth: that the democratic process is no infallible machine for producing wisdom, happiness, fairness, equity, virtue, or justice. It is easily manipulated by those with selfish ends and can be seriously corrupted through ignorance, misinformation, or factional loyalties. And yet, the Unitarian Universalist Association has enshrined as our fifth principle the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Why? Why would we make a fundamental principle out of a process as inherently unprincipled as democracy? I think that Stone had really hit on something when he remarked that here in the United States, although grown scarred and gnarled, democracy has developed the ability to withstand attack. The great virtue of democracy is not the wisdom of the crowd. The great virtue of democracy is its capacity for self-correction. The strength and the potential of the democratic process is not in any single vote, but in the understanding and agreement that we will vote again. And that anything decided by a vote today can in principle be corrected by a vote tomorrow. In our fifth principle, we do not commit to democracy itself as a process for deriving virtue, but to the democratic process as a method for living and working together. Critically, it is a commitment we make not just within our congregations, but in society at large. The essential importance of this capacity for self-correction is why I believe the single most concerning issues facing our country today are threats to our democratic process. More specifically, these threats are, by and large, attempts to systematically alter the way our governing representatives are chosen so as to enthrone the currently powerful against future corrections to their power. And perhaps the most significant and sinister of these threats goes by the Orwellian name of election integrity. Those advocating for election integrity are almost always arguing for more restrictive voting procedures in order to prevent essentially fictitious voter fraud. The first and most important thing you need to know about this debate, a fact that when understood makes almost everything else understandable, is that it's not really about illegal voting. It's about legal voting. You see, generally speaking, there's a trade-off between security and convenience. This trade-off is in no way confined to voting. You probably see this with your computer logins every day. Complicated password requirements or two-factor authentication can be inconvenient, but it also improves security. Same idea even applies at airports. Regarding elections, things like mail-in ballots are convenient. They let you take your time to research candidates or issues and return your ballot at the time and in the manner that works best for you. However, truth be told, mail-in ballots are less secure than, say, in-person voting that requires government-issued photo identification. What does this have to do with legal voting? Well, by making voting less convenient, you decrease the number of people who vote. And this decrease disproportionately occurs with Democratic voters. Consequently, by making legal voting more difficult, Republicans can gain a slight but not inconsequential electoral advantage. Even an improvement of 1% in certain close critical races can be huge. Billions of dollars are spent every election trying to eke out 1% improvements, and so a permanent systemic free advantage would be an amazing boon to the Republicans. That is what the fight is about. Concerns about voter fraud are a ruse to apply the gloss of security concerns to what is otherwise an undemocratic power grab. But wait, you might say, isn't election security a legitimate concern? Isn't voter fraud, at least potentially, a real problem? The answer is that, generally speaking, it's not. While there are always a few isolated incidents of voter fraud, the effect of these isolated incidents is almost always trivial. And the legal penalties for voter fraud are so severe that even if there is an opportunity, which is rare, the cost-benefit ratio is so high that those who might want to be dishonest are discouraged. Generating enough fraudulent votes to change the outcome of election would require a massive coordinated effort that, among other difficulties, would be almost impossible to keep under wraps. This debate about the relative merits of voter security and accessibility is an important one that we've been hashing out in the United States for decades. However, since the rise of Donald Trump, and in particular since his loss in the 2020 election, this debate has taken a conspiratorial, fantastic, and downright dangerous dimension. Specifically, since 2020, Donald Trump, unwilling to accept his loss, has continuously made baseless and nonsensical claims that the election was fraudulently altered, that victory was unfairly stolen from him, and that the presidency of his successor, Joe Biden, is illegitimate. To varying degrees, Republican operatives and politicians who I guarantee know better have either gone along with or explicitly supported these claims of fraud in the hopes that it might make them money, further their careers, or buttress arguments for systemic changes to election laws. Folks, it's a con. It's a big lie. There's absolutely nothing there. It's a monstrous slander that's been perpetuated by dishonest, shameful people in order to get money or votes from those who'd rather hear what they want than the truth. One of the most prominent proponents of this election fraud big lie is somebody I know personally a little bit. My old boss from Overstock, Patrick Byrne. While I didn't know him well, and certainly didn't agree with him on all his political positions, my experience working with Patrick had been positive. I'd always viewed him as smart, reasonable, moral, and fundamentally honest. So when he came out so prominently in support of election fraud conspiracies, I was surprised and figured I should make a good faith effort to understand why. I couldn't see it being the case, but if Patrick was so convinced, I thought that maybe there was something to the claims. After spending more time than I should have investigating and trying to understand the arguments put forth by the election fraud crowd, I've become thoroughly convinced, among other things, that Patrick Byrne is not nearly as intelligent as I believed. All the more fool me, I suppose, and that his support of this big lie isn't insincere, but is one aspect of a delusional, narcissistic fantasy in which he views himself as a historic figure, as a heroic figure of world historic importance, who will help save our country from itself within this time of crisis. It's pretty weird. Patrick's a rather active promoter of conspiracies on Twitter, particularly since Elon Musk let him back on the platform, and I've probably spent more time than is wise arguing with him online about them. I think it's fair to say we're no longer friendly. In fact, about a month ago, he accused me of being part of a cabal of Mormons dedicated to thwarting the revelation of the truth. Well, he caught me. Despite the comical absurdity of this particular accusation, there is a grain of truth behind it. In particular, while it's been no way either uniform or as vocal as it needs to be, I too have noticed that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have, by and large, been better at rejecting and opposing these election fraud lies than most other conservative demographics. While the past few years have worried me, perhaps there is some hope. Perhaps there is still an opportunity for those of all political persuasions to unite and hold firm in favor of the truth and the good faith maintenance of our democratic process. I'd be very happy if, along with many other groups, Unitarians and Mormons stood shoulder to shoulder in that effort. In any event, as Unitarians, our fifth principle compels us to support and to work to maintain the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. That work is very needed at this moment. I hope that we can all be willing to do our part, and that combined with the work of millions of others, it will be enough. But it isn't guaranteed and cannot be taken for granted. So be it.
Thank you, Dylan. Very good talk. And our prayer is A Prayer for America by Reverend Tamara Laback. I picked it because it seems to embody the promise of America and its underlying ideals of equality of all and more, as well as its shortcomings when we don't fully tap into the nation's potential. God of many names, you who has endowed us with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, let us remember this day that in this country there is no national religion, there is no superior race, there is no preferable gender or orientation. We gather holding a common value that the glory of this country rests first and foremost in its diversity. Out of many ideas, out of many beliefs, out of many views, out of many voices, out of many passions, out of many experiences, we are one. Help us, O God, to never forget that we need not be alike to live and love alike. We ask for forgiveness this day for our national and individual transgressions when we have chosen inaction or silence in the face of injustice and abuse of power, and our failure to claim our own. We ask for forgiveness for when we have not known our own neighbor, fed our hungry, or equipped our future generation with knowledge and love. We ask for a blessing on this nation, according to our own faith and forms, and pledge our voice in support of moving closer and closer to freedom. These and the prayers of our hearts we pray now in the silence. In the names of those who have come before and those who are yet to be, in the names of all of the helpers of humankind, amen. And now pause. Release the burden you may feel, if even for a moment. Meditate, relax, use this moment to take a pause to clear your mind. With Memorial Day tomorrow, I'll quickly insert a word of thanks to our military veterans who have passed while serving. If you have anyone on your mind, please speak their name aloud or speak their name to yourself. And join me now in silent meditation or prayer. And now you are invited to come forward to light a candle of hope, memory, or gratitude. You may also wish to drop a stone of burden or forgiveness in our sacred gathered waters. So you're welcome to come up. As always, it can get a little crowded, so just, I guess, cooperate, move around. I will lead the way. And now for the calling of the offering. We rely on your involvement, your attendance, your spirit to keep this church going. It's vital and we appreciate it. We also depend on your financial support, so please give what feels right, what fits with your budget. All donations are greatly appreciated. Suzanne will help with passing of the baskets. And now, please stand, embody your voice, and facing the center aisle, sing together the offered song printed in your order of service. to share from this. Thank you for giving. This money helps this church, helps us in our effort to improve the world in big ways and small. And now, stay standing, please, for our closing hymn, which is number 118 in the black hymnal, This Little Light of Mine. Number 118 in the black hymnal.
We'll sing the 3 verses and then we'll come back to the first verse at the end.
All right, thank you. So as the service comes to an end, remember, we live in a great country with great ideals underlying it. We all have the power to bring about change. At the same time, we can't take it for granted that all the forces pursuing change will always be in our best interests. We must be involved and aware, push for positive change, positive forward movement. And have a great Memorial Day, everybody.